All right, welcome back with an updated edition of the DPC Power Rankings. We are getting closer and closer to the end of the second tour, which is very exciting because, of course, that means that we are getting ever closer to the first official major of the year, which is going to be featuring a crowd, as long as nothing changes, which is going to be super exciting. I'm so stoked for that. We have heard that there is a change to the format of the majors, which is also very nice because I thought the previous major format was a little bit clunky, and I'll be going over the format changes in the coming few weeks once we actually get closer to the major. And when it comes to whether or not we're going to be seeing any Eastern European teams or what's going to be going on there, I'm very curious to see what Valve ends up doing. I hope it's something that ends up being fair to all the teams in that division, but at the same time, we haven't had any games in Eastern Europe, so it feels a little difficult to find out what are the top 3 teams in Eastern Europe right now, which is a big reason as to why I haven't been including them on the power rankings. There's just no realistic way that I can judge them currently. So we'll see what happens in the coming few weeks. Very excited. But as of right now, let's just get into this list, kicking off with the bottom 4 teams, all of them staying in the same spot from last week. So I'm going to group them all together from number 40 all the way to 37. We have Simply 2base, DogChamp, Magma, and LBCS. All of these teams playing out the string, pretty much guaranteed relegation, and in fact for Simply 2base, they are guaranteed relegation, currently sitting at an 0-6 record. They have no chance of dodging it. I'd say out of all of these teams, the team that is perhaps playing the best is Magma. I think Magma has been giving the better teams a little bit of a harder time, but they do have an overall worse week than LBCS, so I can't really move them up from there. But yeah, these are your bottom 4 teams. Following that, at number 36, dropping 1 spot from last week. It has been a real downward spiral. Last week was their huge drop, and they continue to fall even further. That is Nigma Galaxy, who goes 0-2 on the week once again. It has been a real downward spiral for them. They lose 2-0 to Entity, which is a series that they really have to win, and once again, they let it slip through their fingers. It doesn't really look close. They put ILTW on break, and whether or not that ends up being a similar situation to what happened with Weehaw, or if they're going to be replacing him permanently, we'll see. We don't know. We know that Fnatic came in and played for them in their series against Liquid, and it was honestly kind of nice to see Fnatic coming in and playing mid lane for them. He was, of course, a part of the Team Liquid era from around TI6, playing with players like Hiroki and Mind Control back then, so it was a pretty cool reunion to see him play mid, Miracle back to the carry position, but overall didn't end up working out. I will say, though, that their series against Liquid that did feature Fnatic playing mid was one of their best series that they've played. It's a very low bar to reach, but it was one of their best series. They still aren't able to win it. They lose 2-0. So they're my number 36 team currently. At number 35, dropping 1 spot from last week, we have The Cut. The Cut picks up a nice crucial win over Simply 2base, which pretty much guarantees that they're going to be safe from relegation. They technically are still able to be caught up to if they lose their upcoming series against 4 Zoomers, and if DogChamp wins their next series. But given the fact that DogChamp is going to be playing against Evil Geniuses to round off the season, it feels pretty unlikely. But The Cut, I still have my concerns with them. I don't think they're nearly as strong like teams as Wildcard and 4 Zoomers, who are currently sitting in that middle of the pack of North America currently. And we saw that this week with a 2-0 loss to Wildcard. But overall, we'll see how they end up doing up against 4 Zoomers. They're going to be finishing off their season playing up against them in the next few days. At number 34, dropping 1 spot from last week, it is Balrogs. And I gotta say, out of all the teams on this board so far, obviously, because I have them higher than these teams here, Balrogs is playing much better than a lot of the other teams here. They're just not getting the wins, and their 0-5 record really hasn't been representative of how they've been playing and how well they could be doing right now if they were actually able to close out games, which has been their absolute kryptonite to this point. There are a lot of games that they are leading into the mid game, that they're able to turn around in the mid game after having a pretty rough laning stage. They look very impressive, but things tend to fall apart the later on we get into the games, and the other teams in this division are taking full advantage of that. So for a team that's 0-5 right now, this could have very easily been a 3-2 record, maybe even a 4-1 record, as they haven't exactly played against the toughest teams in this division yet. They just haven't been able to win. And for Balrogs, they're 0-5. It looks like they're almost guaranteed relegation at this point. Pretty disappointing, but we'll see how they end up rounding off their tour. Again, they've been playing quite well. They're just not getting the wins, which is obviously a very crucial part of this whole system that we have going on right now. And at number 33, rounding off this bottom row here, we have the other Nigma Galaxy, this time from Southeast Asia. These guys have had a pretty shaky tour, one of their only 2 wins that they've picked up being a forfeit over Boom, so their record is a little bit amped up from what it should be. But they lose a 2-1 series to Execration, which for a team that was absolutely winless to that point is a series that you really need to win when it comes to getting yourself away from relegation, similar to what the Cut did earlier this week to a team like Simply 2Base. They got themselves ahead of the pack. They are not going to be relegated. Nigma Galaxy was not able to win that series. They are still in danger of relegation, and so heading into this tour, I was pretty excited. I thought, maybe there's a realistic chance that we see 2 Nigma Galaxies at the major from Southeast Asia and Western Europe. Now it's looking more likely that both of these guys are going to be getting relegated. Western Europe Nigma Galaxy's already guaranteed that. We'll see what happens to the ones in Southeast Asia. All right, moving on now to our following row, kicking things off with number 32, dropping 4 spots from last week. It has been a pretty big tumble so far for Infinity, who goes 0-2 on the week. It is a rough 2-0 loss to Jokori, a 2-1 loss to Polaris, which is very unfortunate. Of course, they were winning that series 1-0, and then in the second game, they had Parker disconnect, and he was unable to reconnect due to a gameplay bug, which is always really shitty. It's very similar to what happened to Motivate Gaming in the previous tour, where obviously that hindered their chances. Whether or not Infinity would have actually been able to close out the series, we don't know, but this definitely didn't help, and so Lava was able to capitalize on that and come back and win 2-1. So for Infinity, a team that I thought had a lot of potential coming into this division, it has definitely not shaped up to be that way. They're currently one of the front runners for relegation. We'll see how they round off the end of the tour, but overall, not a great week for them. Speaking of a great week, though, jumping up 5 spots from last week to number 31, rounding off their tour. They've already played their last match with a big win. A team that I just talked about, Execration, who hadn't won a single series to this point in the tour. They were 0-6, guaranteed relegation. They go into this last series up against Nigma Galaxy, and they play the spoiler role very well. They pick up a nice win. Again, the closer you are to the bottom, the easier it is for you to rise up, and they gave Nigma Galaxy a really hard time. So even though they're guaranteed relegation, I thought they ended off on a strong foot. We'll see if the roster stays together when they go to the lower division, or if there's some changes. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some changes, but overall, we'll see how they end up doing in the lower division there. And at number 30 and 29, I'm going to be grouping them together just because they haven't moved since the last week. We have Obi Neon and APU King of Kings. Obi Neon, not really too much to say. They have a 2-0 loss at T1. No real shame in that. I don't really bust them down for that, given where they currently are on the board. And for King of Kings, it's very much the same thing. They have a pretty rough 2-0 loss to Beast Coast. It is very clear that this is not the same APU King of Kings that we had in the previous tour, and it's showing. And not to discredit Beast Coast, Beast Coast has been playing exceptionally well in this tour, but King of Kings has been struggling a lot. And where they used to have games that looked kind of close against some of the better teams, sure, they would make some crucial mistakes in the late game or in the mid game that would ultimately cost them the game. These games have not looked nearly as close, and for the Kings, it's been a little bit disappointing this time around. They are currently sitting at number 29. Following that, at number 28, moving up 3 spots from last week, with a nice 1-0 week, we have Jokori, who wins 2-0 over Infinity. Again, a team that has been struggling quite a lot, but Jokori is definitely taking advantage of that, and they are currently setting themselves ahead of some of the other teams that have been struggling in this division. It's going to be interesting to see where they land, but they play against Balrogs later today. We'll see how that goes, but overall, I thought they had a pretty good week. Following that, at number 27, going 0-1 in the week, we have Brame. They lose 2-0 to OG. It was a pretty rough series, but again, given where they currently are on the board and where OG is on the board, I didn't really see any reason to bust down Brame. That's not a series that I think anyone was expecting them to win, especially when BZM was playing as well as he did. But overall, they're sitting at number 27. There's still a really realistic opportunity that they could dodge relegation. They've been getting the wins that they needed to get. We'll see if they can keep up that momentum, turn things around after this pretty rough loss to OG. Following that, at number 26, dropping 2 spots from last week into this bottom row here. They were in the 3rd row last week. That is Entity. Entity goes 1-1 in the week. They pick up a nice crucial win over Nigma Galaxy, which of course is a huge thing that gets them ahead of Nigma Galaxy, gets them out of that possibility for relegation. They obviously are still in danger of it, but they're not nearly as threatened by it. But then they lose a close 2-1 series to Team Secret, in which I thought they played pretty well, but that's a series that I think they should have won. With a team like Secret, who has been playing as inconsistently as they have, this is a series that I think they really need to win. And if they did pick it up, they would have been pretty much guaranteed to avoid relegation at that point. So they dropped down 2 spots. And at number 25, rounding off this row here, moving up one spot from last week, going 2-0 in the week, pretty great week overall, we have Lava. They win both of their series 2-1 over both Balrogs and Infinity. Again, two teams that have been going through their struggles in this tour. So I don't move them up too much, especially again, since that series against Infinity did have that really unfortunate disconnect bug with Parker going on. But still, great week. They're getting themselves ahead of the pack. They are pretty much guaranteed to be safe from relegation at this point, which is very nice to see for them. All right, kicking off this third row at number 24, dropping 4 spots from last week, we have eHome. eHome, they lose 2-1 to Extreme. Not a terrible series by any means, but for a team that I thought had a lot of potential heading into this tour, especially with their pretty impressive performance in the last one, they are showing that they're not quite able to keep up with some of the other teams in this tour that are either coming in from the lower division, like Extreme, who just beat them, or some of the other teams that have gotten better since the last tour, like VG Gaming. So it's looking less and less likely that they make it to the major, especially since right now in China, it really feels like we have a very definitive top half of teams and bottom half of teams. Not guaranteed by any means that they're going to be relegated or that they're not going to make the major, but I think they're 1-3 right now, maybe 1-4, which of course doesn't look all that great for them. So we'll see if they can at least dodge relegation, and if they do, maybe make some changes going forward, but we'll see. At number 23, a team that I just mentioned, moving up 2 spots from last week, we have VG Gaming. VG Gaming went a bit of a downward spiral throughout the past couple weeks, but they pick up a nice 2-1 win over Aster of all teams. Aster, of course, had only played 1 series in the entire DPC up to that point, and VG Gaming looked pretty fantastic in that series. It's not a series that I was expecting them to win. I was very, very impressed with them, and even though it still looks very, very unlikely that they end up catching any of the teams ahead of them in the division, they're currently sitting in 5th place, right behind Aster. I think this was a pretty fantastic week, and they should avoid relegation. Again, I think the major is a little bit out of reach, especially since they have the same amount of wins as Aster, but Aster has 2 additional series left to play. Feels unlikely, but we'll see. At number 22, staying in the same spot from last week, we have 4 Zoomers, who goes 1-0. They pick up a nice 2-0 win over DogChamp. Nothing crazy here, so I thought I would leave them in the same spot. Following that, at number 21, moving up 2 spots from last week, we have Extreme, who goes 1-0. I just talked about them. They picked up a nice 2-1 win over eHome. And the reason why they're not as high as the other teams in this division, despite the fact that they're 4-0, they're undefeated, which is the exact same record as teams like RNG and both PSG.LGD, is because they are teams coming in from the lower division. So, of course, they had to start at the bottom, just by the way that my power rankings work. And another big reason is that we haven't seen them play the best teams in this division yet. All 4 of their wins have been against the teams that have been struggling, like LBCS, Magma, we have, of course, VG Gaming, and eHome. So we'll see how they end up doing when they do play the Goliaths of the region, Aster, RNG, and PSG.LGD. But for now, it has been a pretty fantastic tour for Extreme, and we'll see if they can keep up this momentum. Again, with their current record, they're pretty much guaranteed a spot at the major, which already in and of itself is fantastic for the team. We'll see if they can keep up this momentum. Following that, at number 20, moving up 1 spot from last week, we have Wildcard, who goes 1-0 in the week. They have secured themselves a spot in the upper division for the following tour. They will not be making it to the major, but they will also not be getting relegated, which is pretty exciting. It's where we thought that Wildcard would end up being. I think the team has made some pretty fantastic strides throughout this tour, notably being able to beat teams like 4 Zoomers, which has been huge for them. And they pick up another win this week over the Cut, which, again, is a team that I think is quite good. Definitely not one of the better teams in this division, but they still made it look quite easy. So for Wildcard, it has been a huge improvement since the start of the first tour to now, and I'm very excited to see how far they can take this. Following that, at number 19, dropping back down 1 spot from last week, back to where they were 2 weeks ago, that's Infamous, with a pretty rough 2-0 loss to Thunder Awaken. Infamous, as well as a lot of the other teams in Southeast Asia, proving to have been struck with this inconsistency after I thought that they made some pretty decent changes to the roster in the offseason. Things have not played out as well as I think we were expecting them to, and so they've been struggling a little bit. They're currently sitting at number 19. At number 18, moving up 1 spot from last week, we have Team Secret. Very close series against Entity, again, as I mentioned when I talked about Entity, but it's a win that they pick up. It's a win that they needed to get, and it's a win that gets them closer to making it into that top 4, which means a major, a presence at the major, which is not guaranteed for them right now. They need to be picking up these wins, and this was a pretty big, crucial one. Again, not the most impressive. Secret has still been pretty wildly inconsistent with these roster changes that they've made, that they made a few months ago. But overall, I can't fault them for having a pretty decent week. And at number 17, rounding off this row here, staying in the same spot from last week, we have Polaris. Polaris loses 2-1 to Fnatic, and I don't bust them down too much for that just because Fnatic has been playing absolutely insane. And Polaris still took a game off of them, which very few teams have been able to do up to this point up against Fnatic. So overall, I think Polaris is still playing quite well. I definitely think that they're playing much more consistently than pretty much any other team on this board, except maybe Extreme, who again, for reasons I've already talked about, I don't have as high as Polaris yet. But overall, I think Polaris has a lot to look back on in this tour and be pretty happy about. And also a lot that they can probably improve upon to get themselves to be one of the best teams in this division. Because I do think that they have that potential. It is just a very, very difficult division. All right, we are now moving into the top 2 rows, kicking things off with number 16, dropping 1 spot from last week. We have Quincy Crew, who goes 1-1 on the week. And it's really their loss against EG that struck me as the most important series. They pick up a nice 2-0 win over Simply 2Base, but again, looking at where Simply 2Base is on the board right now, not all that surprising. It was more so the fact that Quincy Crew has been struggling quite a bit, especially in comparison to the other teams in this division like EG and TSM. And I was worried about when they would play against these other Goliaths of the region that they would struggle, and it was a pretty handedly beat down by Evil Geniuses in this series. So Quincy Crew, they have another series coming up against TSM, and if they lose that one, they're pretty much guaranteed to not make it to the major, which would be a huge blowback for a team that has been doing very, very well for a long time in North America, but hasn't really been getting that recognition, hasn't been really getting that full, sustained top of the division, top of the DPC in general, consistency that they really needed to have. So we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But yeah, they need to win that series up against TSM when that does eventually come. And at number 15, moving up 1 spot from last week, they also have a pretty not great week, but I thought that they had an overall better week than Quincy Crew, and that is SMG. They lose 2-0 to Fnatic, who, as I talked about when I was talking about Polaris, has been on an absolute tear as of late, so no real fault to them for losing to them. The game 1 was incredibly close, but they ultimately let it slip. So we'll see how it goes for SMG. They still do have a shot of making it to the major. It looks a little bit less likely now, especially with teams like T1 and Boom still playing as consistently as we know that they can, but we'll see. Following that, at number 14, dropping 2 spots from last week, it's Aster. They go 1-1 in the week. Again, I had been dropping them slightly the past few weeks just because we hadn't seen them play. They'd only played 1 series. Then they have that 2-1 loss to Vici Gaming, which was a little bit alarming, which is the main reason why I do drop them down. They do round off the week with a pretty decent win over Magma. But again, given where Magma is on the board, given the way Magma has been playing as of late, not the most impressive win. So we'll see if Aster is able to turn it around. Again, with the state of China right now, where we have 4 definitive top teams and 4 definitive bottom teams, it feels pretty unlikely that Aster slips down into that 5th spot, but it was not the most impressive week overall for them, so that's why I dropped them down. At number 13, moving up 1 spot from last week with a pretty solid week overall, going 2-0, that is Team Liquid. Team Liquid, nice 2-1 win over Tundra, fantastic win overall. It was a pretty close series, but a very crucial one that they needed to win. And then they round off the week with a strong 2-0 win over Nigma Galaxy in a series that was pretty close, but it never really felt like Liquid was going to let that series slip. So Liquid, who started off pretty rough, are now off to a pretty solid run. They should be making it to the major, which is always exciting, and we'll see if they're able to keep up this momentum through the coming few weeks. Following that, at number 12, and I debated about switching these 2 teams given the results of the past week, but I thought that dropping this team 2 spots and moving Liquid up 1 spot was enough for this week. We'll see how things go in the next few weeks, and that's Tundra. Tundra does lose 2-1 to Team Liquid. They are currently sitting tied in 4th place with Team Secret. They do have a game in hand, which does currently help them, but they have been slipping a little bit as of late. That series lost to OG, now they lose to Liquid. They haven't been looking nearly as dominant as they were at the start of the tour, which has been the main reason why Tundra has never really been able to consistently stay at the top of this board, like many people maybe expect, because they usually have these rough patches where they look really, really good for a few weeks, and then they look pretty mediocre for a few weeks. And it's really just this on and off with Team Tundra. We don't really know what Tundra we're going to be getting with any given series, so They dropped down to number 12. And at number 11, staying in the same spot from last week, we have Thunder Awaken. Pretty solid week overall for Thunder Awaken. They pick up a pretty solid 2-0 win over Infamous, who, again, hasn't been playing the best, which is why I don't exactly bump Thunder Awaken all that much. I'm really just anticipating that series against Beast Coast, because overall right now, out of every team in South America, these two teams by far are looking the most dominant and the most consistent. Just very excited for that. And at number 10, moving up 3 spots from last week, they even secured themselves a major spot already. That is going to be Fnatic, who goes 2-0 on the week. They pick up a strong 2-1 win over Polaris, and they pick up another strong 2-0 win over SMG. They're currently 5-0. They're undefeated. And granted, they haven't played against T1 or Boom yet. They have been on an absolute tear, absolutely undefeated. And I just cannot wait for them to play against the other 2 best teams in this division to see really just how strong they are. I think that all of the players have been playing fantastic. Armel has been a superstar for the team. We'll see how far they go. And at number 9, staying in the same spot from last week, to round off this row here, we have T1. And I, again, debated about swapping these 2 teams between Fnatic and T1 just because of how well Fnatic has been playing, and T1 does lose a series this week. It was to Boom, which is a big reason as to why I don't drop them. If T1 had lost a series to SMG, to Execration, a team like that, then I definitely would have dropped them. But T1, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Boom has definitely looked like the most consistent team in this division, in this region throughout the entire year so far. But they do have an upcoming series against Fnatic, and depending on the result from that series, that will end up deciding which team ends up ending up ahead of one another in these power rankings. All right, moving now into our top row, kicking things off with the team who didn't play this week. They stay in the same spot from last week. We have the Gaming Gladiators. They have their next big series up against Tundra on the 16th. That's going to be a really fun one to watch. We'll see if Gladiators are going to be able to snap out of that rough loss that they had to OG, or if they're going to do what Tundra did and kind of have a little bit of a slip down the rankings a little bit. And Tundra, that's also a big series for them. We'll see if they're able to bounce back. They're on a 2-game losing streak right now. If they lose this series up against Gladiators, that's now 3 series in a row that Tundra has lost. So that's going to be a huge series. Following that, at number 7, we have, staying in the same spot from last week, going 1-0, a clean 2-0 win over Brame. It's OG, and with this win, they have officially secured themselves a spot at the Major. Super exciting. These guys have had an absolutely amazing past couple weeks. Again, that last prior week to this one, where they beat both Gaming Gladiators and Tundra in the same week, was fantastic. They are continuing that momentum by taking down Brame, and sure, Brame isn't exactly one of the better teams in this division. The way that they beat them was fantastic. Again, I already talked about a BZM Storm Spirit, absolutely insane. And I cannot wait to see these guys at the Major to see if they're able to replicate this performance against teams from other regions. Following that, at number 6, staying in the same spot from last week as well, we have RNG. A nice 2-0 win over Magma. Not too much to write home about there. It was a relatively close series. Again, Magma has been giving these better teams a little bit of a harder time, but overall, RNG still able to close that out, and they're currently 4-0. They're currently tied in first place with both Extreme and PSG.LGD. They've been playing very well. Following that, at number 5, these guys dropped down 1 spot from last week. Not that they didn't play well, I just thought that some other teams had some better weeks this week. It's Beast Coast. Again, strong 2-0 win over APU King Kings. No slight against Beast Coast. I still think they're one of the best teams in the DPC, especially in their own region. But again, I thought some other teams in this list had a better week overall than Beast Coast. At number 4, dropping 2 spots from last week, we have Boom. They dropped down 2 spots despite going 2-0, again, because they didn't have the most convincing 2 wins there. One of them was against T1, which of course is never going to be an easy win. That one ends up being a 2-1 win for Boom, which ultimately helps them get even closer to the Major. But they also drop a game to Execration, which is a little bit alarming. And again, the closer you are to the top, the easier it is for you to fall. So when you're not playing at that 110% level, you are going to drop a little bit. And for Boom, even though they have a pretty great week, even though they get themselves even closer to the Major, I do drop them down a little bit. And at number 3, moving up 2 spots from last week, I think it's safe to say that these guys are back and they should be attending this year's Major, and that is Evil Geniuses. And there was a lot of, memes about EG from the last tour. They ultimately ended up coming through and finishing 2nd place in the regional finals, which was not what anyone was expecting, especially halfway through the first tour. They have looked utterly dominant throughout this entire tour. Every single series has been just an absolute stomp, including the one against one of the other best teams in this division, Quincy Crew, and I am just super stoked for when they have to play against TSM FTX, which is going to be coming up in the next few weeks. I believe that's going to be on April 16th, so tune into that one. And at number 2, they didn't play any matches this week, but they do move up one spot, mainly because Boom ends up moving down. That is TSM FTX. Again, super stoked for that matchup on April 16th up against EG. That is going to be probably one of the most exciting matches of this whole tour. And at number 1, that means that it's going to be the same spot as last week, PSG.LGD. They go 1-0 in the week with a pretty solid win over LBZS. It wasn't exactly the most impressive team to beat, but it was an absolute stomp of a series. And so for PSG.LGD, again, until I see them struggle at all, they're going to be sitting at number 1. So yeah, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you agree, disagree about anything on this list, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. As always, again, as we're getting closer and closer to the major, there's going to be more and more content coming in from my channel, especially when it comes to talking about the new major format, which is going to be exciting to talk about. And of course, what's going to be going on with the teams in Eastern Europe for this upcoming tour. So if you don't want to miss that, stay tuned. Feel free to like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys very soon.